Usually what happens when we have an incident that involves oiled wildlife, we call in a wildlife rehab team, the local team that we probably call in the most on the East Coast. It's called Tri-State Bird Rescue. They're based out of Wilmington, Delaware.
There we go.
And you know what, Michelle, why don't you stand up and introduce yourself.
So my name is Michelle. I'm Michelle Knapp, Tri-State Bird Rescue and Research. We have two other staff members here, Carly and Jordan. But we primarily respond on the East Coast, east of the Mississippi, is like what we like to say, but really mid-Atlantic to eastern Canada when it comes to oiled wildlife response. We do hold different permits in the different states that allow us to do the work we do. And we do have a wildlife response facility based in Delaware. So if you're ever up there, come on by, we'll show you around. But if you have any questions, we'll be here all day. Thanks, Frank.
But they're the primary, again, as Michelle said, as far as spills on the East Coast, they would be the primary entity that would come on scene, and they would basically set up an animal hospital where they would treat live oiled wildlife, and they would also maintain a mortuary for dead oiled wildlife. And all that information would be collected and used as part of the response, but more importantly, it would go into feeding the natural resource damage assessment process. And it's real interesting. Seeing yes, they do use Dawn.
Well, actually, we did some research and we switched over to palm olive. But we do a lot of research at our facility too. So we're always continuing to try to find the best methods. But
my mom goes,
that ad can finish out
and I'm like, yeah, they do.
We will if we need to.
Just 2 cents real fast. Never underestimate the importance of wildlife response. It'll drive the response. Outside of this room, very few people care how many parts per million hydrocarbons are under the rock in Alaska. They see the half white, half black polar bear, the dead sea otter, the birds. That's what the public sees, and that could run your response for you.
That gets a lot of people upset.
Yeah.
Which as a moderator, should probably do active management. So Alan Williams was the state of Maryland lead state representative for oil spill response for many years, and now he's sort of retired. But a lot of us who retire cannot quite get it out of our system. So
well, I'm
anyway,
a part-timer with MD, with the Department of the Environment, doing this stuff.
Simon, can everybody hear? Do we need to use the mic? Can everybody hear? You can hear?
I just wanted to add one thing to the wildlife thing, especially with...
And say who you are.
Hi, my name's Simeon Hahn. I work for NOAA, I work with Frank, but in Office of Response and Restoration, but as was mentioned, I'm in the Assessment and Restoration Division, like for the damage assessment stuff. But for Ed's question, for some other species, endangered species, marine endangered species, particularly marine mammals was mentioned, and turtles, things like that, there are stranding networks. Yeah, so that's the complementary side to the Tri-State stuff, and they work with us on NRDA stuff too.
Just yes, yeah.
To add to that,
just stand up and introduce yourself so we all know. And
I'm Sarah Rose. I'm with the Virginia Aquarium and represent the local stranding network in Virginia Beach. One of my main questions is how we would handle a marine mammal and sea turtle response. Within the aquarium, I think I'm the only one with HAZWOPER, and I have HAZWOPER 24. Would also present some challenges in quarantining those animals, since we do have an active rehab center. We have the only rehab center in Virginia, so I'm just wondering how the chain would get started in the event that we had an oil spill with oiled mammals or sea turtles.
I can add some. So one of the things that John had that great slide on ICS, and it had the environmental piece under planning. What it didn't show sometimes is under operations, we'll stand up a wildlife branch and other branches that would work together. The short answer is we're going to call people like you. As a federal agency, we don't have the subject matter expertise in order to handle that situation, but we can identify it and start phoning friends and start reaching out to folks on this panel and in the room to say, hey, we need some assistance. We're getting reports of oiled, whether it's a whale, whether it's a bird, which we've dealt with before, or other mammals. Is it something that's endangered? those are things that we are gonna take a look at as part of that unified command and identify the folks to come in and say, hey, we need you to come in. And I actually need your card to come to the area committee meeting.
Yeah, because several years ago, there was another young lady that worked at the aquarium, and she was probably
Yep.
your predecessor. I forgot her name.
Probably Christine.
And she left
Yeah.
the aquarium.
Christina Trappiani?
Yeah.
No.
That was over you. I think the big point is.
Yeah.
Frank, you're not thinking of Jennifer Ditmar,
A
are
big
you?
part of,
No, she's
why
at-
we do
she's
stuff
at the
like
ball,
this,
yeah.
whether it's through the RRT or these workshops, which are fantastic,
So,
is really to have that information of sharing now and to get to know the partners now. The area committee meeting, which the reason why I brought that up is that falls under the shop that I run at Sector Hampton Roads. That's where I try and bring in those right folks, the right people in the area to say, let's meet ahead of time, because we all know the worst thing to do is be a stranger at a response, not know who the people are. And we know a lot of folks, but there's always more to bring to the table.
Right, I think with the deep water, you had a lot of trained responders with the subject matter expertise, but they didn't have the training to actually work hands-on with those animals.
Yep.
So one of our interests is getting some local accessible training to get folks with HAZWA 24, 40 maybe.
well, I would recommend that you hook up with Michelle, take advantage of her being here
So-
today.
So to add to that, your concerns about possibly quarantining and getting like a different facility, Tri-State has experience setting up a stand-up facility specific to a response, because that's always a concern. We don't want to use an already AZA or another facility that has wildlife. We don't want to contaminate something that may be at a zoo. So we do have experience setting up facilities or transporting them. We connect with the National Aquarium because they have that same concern up in just a little farther north in Baltimore, because with marine mammals, they have species there, but their concern is the cross-contamination. So we have a partnership with them where they could transfer those animals to our facility, because we're not NOAA permitted for marine mammals, but we have a facility that's purpose-built in this region, not too far from here, just about 5 hours, where we could transport animals up there and work out of that facility. So we'll connect.
So Ann, I did want to just tag on to that. I'm Fish and Wildlife Service, and we oversee a lot of the wildlife response. And it's really important, because you brought up permitting. There's, because we have a lot of volunteers that show up during the spill and they want to help, and a lot of times the media focuses on the folks that we're not letting help, but there are permits that are required to handle all these birds, all the marine mammals. And it's for the protection of the individual, but also the species. So I think it's really important to know, not just anyone can show up and help. We usually have a wildlife hotline number set up, and that's what we want the public to do, is call that number and we'll send somebody out.
Erin, you had some.
So I'm the local here that learned all this on the fly. We have an oil spill and birds and fish and turtles and so on and so forth. And a lot of you work in your industries and know the ins and outs. I know way more about oil spills now than I ever thought. I sit on the area committee. I'm here. I talk about it now and try and engage our city to understand it. But not heard of, obviously I know our aquarium, but had not heard of, we had Tri-State, we had USDA, we had Inland Game and Fisheries, we had the alphabet soup, and I had no idea what anybody did, and I was the local on-scene coordinator. So wherever you are, I know that some of your locals do participate in your area committee, but reach out to them, because it was like drinking through 5 fire hoses trying to figure out who's who in the zoo, and literally, because we did have the wildlife issue, albeit it was mostly the fish and turtles. We had a few birds, but we had residents going and picking them up, and that was the first report that the news media asked every single day. How much wildlife has been contaminated? How much wildlife has died? What has this? So it is a significant piece that your locals, especially in the smaller communities, just don't understand it, and once it happens or is on their shore, becomes so overwhelming that you need to make sure that you educate.
So the spill that Erin is talking about is the spill that resulted at the Oceana Naval Air Station when a storage facility had a problem, and so it was jet fuel, right? jet fuel. So it wasn't like the black oil, crude oil that you think about, and so it was a different kind of spill. And the other point, just to follow up, because you made an excellent point, is that area committees have always been open since they were formed in the 90s. The problem is kind of capturing the attention of people to make the time to participate. And people say, well, you didn't get invited. They, well, I was never invited. Well, they're open. So that's really one of the best things I think this workshop can do, is help us reach out and connect with those of you who are concerned, and especially would have an interest. So just to connect the dots. Frank.
And if, for you people here that are basically here learning about oil spills for the first time, I mean, all of us, this is one family up here. We've been working with each other for years, except for Erin. I just met her last week. We just adopted her.
He met me during the oil spill, but that's how busy he was.
We just adopted her recently. But we all do a lot of outreach and training. So if you have an organization that you feel would be interested in receiving outreach and training materials, whether it be a webinar or in person, that's part of our jobs up here, such as like this, forum here.
So Frank, mention all the stuff you brought, speaking of outreach and materials.
Yeah, I have a back table there that I emptied out my truck that's back there with papers about shoreline oiling, toxicity. I got curriculums from some of my science of oil spills classes about how oil behaves, different sensitivity of environments. Please feel free to take all that stuff because I don't want to bring it back home. And there's contact information about seafood contamination, which is another issue that would be an issue here in this area, particularly with all the agriculture that takes place. And so there's a lot of outreach materials on the back table there, and I believe there's some up here. On your way out or whatever, please feel free to take it.
And that's kind of the key piece too. I talk about the wildlife piece, but and a lot of you are you're immersed in the oil industry. But kind of the lay people having workshops like this and having things, I tried to get a few extra of our folks from the city to come, and our Convention Visitor Bureau Director is here. Oil on our beach obviously would be absolutely devastating to the city of Virginia Beach, and trying to engage those outside industries that will be on the, and I know deep water is kind of the thing, but it wouldn't take much for our beaches. Do you agree, Brad? It wouldn't take much. They have coal pieces washing up on the shore in Cape Charles, and it is kind of the end of the world for them. But that's a key piece too, is imparting a lot of your knowledge on some of those that aren't even in the industry at all.
So the point is, come to our area committee meetings, and if you'd like to get some training, for your organization or a number of organizations, we'd be happy to.
So Frank, when's your next course?
Host that.
In Chickasee. When's the next course?
Well, I have a shoreline cleanup course scheduled for April 30th, May 1st, and May 2nd, but that's already full.
Well, he comes back every so often, pretty often. Yep. So
And can I just kind of bring some perspective to the wildlife issue, and especially with Oceana and the concept of spill, and I see the environment thing. I put the word restoration up there. So some people may associate restoration with the environment or wildlife or stuff, but it's important to realize from the organizational thing, it was shown that the damage assessment stuff is funded differently. It's kind of, we work really closely together, but generally it's easier to get funds to respond to a spill, but that's also some challenges, I think maybe in the Oceana spill. And it was certainly a challenge for us to do actual restoration, and we're still trying to work on that because, like in that Oceana spill, in addition to the wildlife spill, there was a lot of wetland vegetation that died, and it's continuing to cause problems, and there's kind of a bureaucratic hurdle to get over.
Just make a statement, just tell people why the jet fuel spill, kind of how it's different for wildlife than a normal black crude oil spill that people might be more familiar with from news.
Yeah, with the jet fuel, just because of composition and stuff, you don't really see like oil. It's not a black gooey oil, so you don't see that type of thing. But it's highly toxic. It's more soluble in the water, and it's very toxic to the plants. But the main point was, and I think it's important for the community to know this, because I'm still frustrated by it and challenged by it, but it was a relatively easy, in my opinion, restoration project that could have been done there to prevent further damage. But because of the way the funds are set up and who did the spill and things like that, we weren't able to get that yet.
So just to clarify a little bit more, in this case, the responsible party, instead of being an oil company, was the Navy. So anybody who spills, I mean, if you have a fishing boat that goes aground, that would be the responsible party, the source of that spill. So, I don't know, you want to say anything about the funding?
Sure.
Sure,
Because
okay.
I am the regional manager for,
Can everybody hear?
I think you can probably hear me.
Okay, go ahead.
For the Fun Center, we're out of Washington DC. Unfortunately, on that spill, because it's a federal facility, and those are the rules, there are no claims available to be paid out of the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. And that's the nexus of the thing, right, is where that money is coming from. So I'm glad I'm back here in the corner, because that's where I like to be. Folks don't really care about what we do, just tell me how much money I get.
So when you say claims, you're talking about response claims or NERDA claims?
Well, in this case, from
This
what
was
Cindy
not,
is saying,
yeah, we didn't, the damage assessment, but we weren't really able to make a claim to the fund because it's excluded because of federal. But then we are trying to work with the Navy too, and through with DEQ.
States can make a claim.
The states can make.
Yeah, well, and we're working with them on that, although
Yeah.
that's not that easy either. Because
So
it's,
just to
because,
add a little bit more background on that spill, without us continuing to get into the weeds too much on that specific spill, the Navy did everything they could during that spill. What was brought out, and this was a lesson learned for the Navy, and the Navy OSC is actually here, was that they don't have emergency funding to respond to an oil hazmat spill like that off their property. Nobody ever thought, if you saw the location of where this tank was and where it ended up affecting, how far was it? Does anyone? 2.1 miles. 2.1 miles from the actual storage tank, somehow got through this area of drainage, made its way to a little creek, made its way up to another one and to a river. Nobody is one of these situations that we learned from that situation. The Navy's learned from it, and I know they're doing a lot of internal look on how would they respond in the future should something affect the community outside their gates. But during that spill, at that time, they did everything they could. They just didn't have that emergency funding available that we're used to when we're dealing with a responsible party like an oil organization or a ship or something of that nature. But they were there side by side doing their best to try and work through it. It just was challenging for all of us because it was different and it wasn't anything that anyone thought would happen.
Yes, question?
Yeah, just Ted Tomasi with Cardno. I'm a consultant, work mostly with responsible parties on NERDA. But just following up on the thought of a novel chemical that moves fast. I'm here for Jeff Wakefield, who is responding to the chemical spill at fire and spill down in Texas. And the firefighting foam and these fluoride compounds, just, you know, they're novel. We don't have a lot of knowledge of them and concentrations, and they move like mad. So, you know, I think that we can focus on oil, and I think probably appropriately so. But I think our preparedness would be lacking if we didn't also build into some of these more novel possible releases, which could generate both response and NERDA type issues.
So one point of clarification then, so the National Contingency Plan in the United States covers both oil and hazardous substances. This focus, because it comes out of funds for Deepwater Horizon, the primary focus is oil. And that's the one that really, oil, as Jerry Galt used to say, oil is very photogenic. An oil spill is very photogenic. And a lot of the other chemicals and things you can't really see, so it doesn't make a good photo op. So people are really, really concerned about oil spills, but certainly jet fuel, which is not as black and persistent, and FFF foam is something that responders, especially up in Delaware Bay, where you have a lot of port facilities, is something that's been of concern from a pollution standpoint. Firefight is necessary for firefighting, but it's a problem. So nothing's ever perfect. There's no perfect solution. It's part of the problem. So there are some other hands. Donna.
Donna Bose, I'm with the Citizens for a Better Eastern Shore. We're a 30-year environmental local government action group. My question is, who decides the priorities for the cleanup? I'm sure the resources, you know, especially in the beginning, are gonna, so, you know,
Yeah,
put the David
great
and
question.
Goliath in the room, being on the eastern
Right.
shore, we have these, you know, barrier islands, which,
Right.
you know, some people might say, nobody lives there. So
Yeah.
we got the oil going there, even though they're our, you know, one of our
Right,
main
right.
economic, you know, is, drivers is aquaculture.
Yep.
And then you've got to go in towards Virginia Beach with the resorts and, you know, so,
Right.
you know.
Great question. So one, just a little preempt, we're gonna say, we are gonna focus on the Eastern Shore this year, the Barrier Islands specifically, but to the larger point of who set priorities, Renee, you're probably, it's back to you.
So the priorities, you know, I always look at a spill, whether it's oil or hazardous material, it's a complicated situation, right? A lot of bad stuff, a lot of damages are gonna happen no matter what we try and do. The biggest thing is, again, knowing our partners, and that's what we are doing, focusing on the Eastern Shore right now, but within our whole area, is who do we start contacting? Knowing how long it's gonna take us to get up to that area specifically, one of the first things we would do is reach out to the agriculture and let them know, if you have water intake, shut those down. What are things that folks in those areas can start doing before we get out there? Especially when you look at the sensitive area of the Eastern Shore, and I know Joe's here, one of my
Oh, where'd
favorite
Joe?
folks.
Oh, where'd he go? He was there. Oh, there
We've
he
been
is.
doing a lot
Joe,
of
put your
work
hand
with
up.
him in that area specifically, but having an idea of, hey, is there something they can go do, the scientists out there, to start removing bird nests, or is there things they can pick up, especially knowing that's gonna come more from offshore instead of the facility onshore. There is some time built in as long as those notifications are made. So that would be part of that initial response in a sense. It's also being proactive. And when we talked about GRSs, the geographic response strategies, not all of them are to contain the material. A lot of them are to protect an area. So laying out and that's where we would have conversations. Is it better to put boom out in this area? Or for that specific area, is the boom going to now cause more damage because of the eelgrass and the bay scallops? So these are conversations that we have to have, and they're difficult decisions to make because we can't protect everything. That's the hardest thing of a spill.
That's what we're concerned
That's the
about.
hardest
We don't
thing.
have the billion.
But
Even if you had all the boom in the whole world, you will not protect everything. It's just, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
Yes.
John,
Did it answer your question though?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Our
Oh, yes.
concern is that we're kind of small potatoes.
yeah, well, you're not,
No,
you're
no,
not
no,
small
no, believe
potatoes,
me,
'cause-
you're on the radar. The Eastern Shore is on the radar.
Yes.
But
We are.
if you
Joe
refer
Farah.
back to the organizational chart that John showed earlier,
Yeah.
as the spill response, framework, you have the Fish and Wildlife Service, you have NOAA, you have the state, you have, potential other agencies like the National Park Service or NASA has a facility up there, they could be involved. They
And
would
the
all-
Nature Conservancy.
the
Don't
Nature
forget the
Conservancy,
Nature
the land
Conservancy.
landowner, land manager. So all of these people would be hopefully talking and coordinating with one another, identifying what their concerns and priorities are. Let's face it, there's gonna be winners and losers during the spill, okay? If there's a spill here in January, it may be more acceptable to sacrifice the beach right out here